Jeffrey. Okay.
Yeah, maybe give him 1 more minute.
1 more minute. Okay.
It's funny how addictive that little counter is. Keep your eye on the 18, 19, 21.
What counter? Oh.
At the number of participants.
Oh. You must be, yeah, you're looking different than I am. Okay,
Yeah.
good. You look at that. Oh.
Okay, well,
Oh, I see.
We are growing. We should get started.
I see. Okay. All right. Are you good for me to start? All right. So I guess people can decide if they want to be in speaker view or gallery view on their own, right? Okay. So, all right. I'm gonna welcome us. All right. So we are now gonna join together for the Kaplan Educational Innovation Conference with my colleagues from RENA, who were meeting earlier today, from the Reconstructionist Educators of North America. It has been a sincere pleasure to serve as the education networker for this conference and to have been involved since the beginning as we promoted the Cedarbaum Prize. I've had the good fortune to engage with amazing, innovative educators from all Jewish backgrounds. These innovators come from within our different movements and beyond. A huge yasher koach to all 39 who applied, and a special thank you to all of our presenters for today. And we're going to begin the afternoon with Dr. Eric Kaplan. So I'm going to introduce Eric. Dr. Eric Kaplan, who is a co-founder of the Kaplan Center, currently serves as our vice president and academic advisor, and is an associate professor of contemporary Judaism and Jewish education at McGill University. He is currently assembling an anthology of Jewish social activist thought in North America from 1860 to 2021, and preparing for the publication of the final volume of excerpts from the Diaries of Mordechai Kaplan, 1951 to 1978, through Wayne State University Press. Eric's book, From Ideology to Liturgy, Reconstructionist Worship and American Liberal Judaism, Hebrew Union College Press of 2002, is being reissued with an extensive new preference in 2022. And I will now turn it over to Eric.
Great. All right. Unmute myself. Okay. Well, welcome everyone back from lunch. I'm going to share my screen, and the introduction that you just heard is actually a good introduction to some of the text that we're going to see, because the first thing that I've put up here is in fact a selection from the parts of the Kaplan diaries that I'm working on editing. So when Jeffrey gave me the task of trying to come up with something from Kaplan that could be both relevant and hopefully inspiring in some way, it just happened to also coincide. I'm teaching this course at McGill called Visions and Realities of Jewish Education. And the part of the course that I'm in now is about what we know about Jewish educators. These are the reports that CASG released last summer. The results of their extensive study of the field. People who are, stayed in the field of Jewish education, people who left the field of Jewish education, and people who decided not to enter the field of Jewish education. And one of the results of the study is that there's a slightly higher measure of idealism amongst the people who decided to stay within the field of Jewish education than those who either chose not to go into it or the ones who decided to leave it. Now, there's a lot of other factors that come into play, but I was thinking about that idealism question because in my Kaplan Center hat, I've been looking at some things in Kaplan, both published and unpublished, that really kind of relate directly to this question of idealism. And I thought it could be both interesting and edifying to take a look at some of these. So that's kind of the agenda for the next couple of minutes that we have. I don't know if the structure will allow for a lot of questions and give and take, as it's a small session. So if things pop into your mind about the text and what I'm saying about them, if you put them in the chat, it can perhaps help us kind of deal with them, if not in this little small session, but afterwards in some other context. So as many of you probably know, in addition to all of Kaplan's published writings, he kept a very large and extensive diary that Mel Scalt has been so instrumental in bringing to our attention. And here's something, two things from the diaries in 1955. And if you're reading ahead here, you can see that it's kind of also appropriate for a gathering such as ours, both in terms of education and for those of you who are Reconstructionists on it. So Kaplan notes in the diary that in the New York Times, there was an article that made him reflect upon what is going to happen to Reconstructionism. And it doesn't make him happy. What is it? It's the announcement that the Progressive Educational Association, and like the indented parts are quotes from the New York Times article, long a powerful influence in shaping teacher methods, will die quietly on Saturday at a meeting of a board of directors. And to show you how important it was for Kaplan, he actually gives much larger chunks of the article than from the New York Times than the piece that I've included here. But he says the part of the article which hurts the most is the following. There's a more cogent reason for the end of the Progressive Education Association, and that is the disrepute, even contempt, in which the term progressive has been held in recent years. It kind of resonates with the election environment that some of you are just coming out of. But here in relation to schooling and to Dewey. In many school systems, it has been the educational kiss of death to be labeled a disciple of Dewey or a member of the association, which is a crime, I have to say, because as somebody who's also teaching the philosophy of education, sometimes when you read Dewey, you kind of feel like, okay, our work is done. So Kaplan wonders here, how soon will that happen to Reconstructionism? That, we're also going to close, kind of like the Progressive Education Association is closing, for the same kind of basic dynamic. Now, for people who are interested in Kaplan's influences, the paragraph that follows in the diaries is very interesting, right? Because he says one of the reasons why this whole thing got him thinking about Reconstructionism is because of his own strong identification with John Dewey. And he says here that, Dewey and Ahad Ha'am helped to mold my life more than any other Dewey, who together with Ahad Ha'am helped to mold my life more than any other person in the world, past or present. So what does he say? Then he says, sad as it is for me to contemplate what is likely to be the fate of Reconstructionism, I am not discouraged to the extent of giving up the fight for the normalization of Jewish life, which today is an awful mess, right? In other words, Kaplan is often accused of being, an optimist and, being overly optimistic about general society, about the potential for change, etc. But if you hang out with Kaplan long enough, you know that really doesn't apply. And in the diaries, this comes out very strongly because, he's hardly delusional about the realities, and it comes out very strongly in his writings, but the diaries especially in these kind of selections. So why is he, not going to give up the fight if he imagines that Reconstruction is going to land up shutting down, and maybe for the same dynamic reasons as the Progressive Education Association? Dewey's philosophy has gone out of style. He says, well, this only goes to verify what I have to say on the preceding page of the diary about the primacy of the will to live and to make the most of life, despite the awareness of the ultimate demise of the world, right? How's that for ultimate demise of the world? That's pretty serious business. Now, so the next quote that I gave you is that famous previous page. and what he's saying here. And what's interesting, I think, is that he could, say, we just have to be optimistic and we can't give up and we have to keep on plugging away at it because that's just, what we should do as idealistic people. But what's interesting about Kaplan is that Kaplan was worried about an idealism that is not rooted in something that transcends it, that kind of guarantees that it's not a ridiculous idealism, right? And we're going to see a couple of texts here that kind of show that. In other words, he's not going to stop by just telling us, right, that, he's not discouraged and the rest of us should not be discouraged. He's going to try to come up with something that is, more profound than that. And I think he succeeds, right? So in this, reading in the previous day of the diaries, he talks about, he's very sharp about what's happening in our world. And it was true for 1955, and I think a lot of it is true for today as well. We seem to go on piling up new evils with every new good. And then if you add to that the prophecies of the physicists and the astronomers concerning the cooling of the sun and the final return of the earth to the ice age, and what have you of similar glooming forebodings, and one can understand why more and more people live lives of quiet desperation. They don't talk about it, they don't discuss, and they don't pray. What do? They try to forget by seeking escape in some exciting activities or intoxicating pleasure. But Kaplan feels that won't do. But again, he feels that it won't do, not because, that's just bad, but because he wants to argue that that's actually an affront to not only to human nature, but it's an affront to the way the whole universe is constructed, right? Because Kaplan, never lowballs. He always aims big. So let's take a look at this sentence, what he says here. Regardless of what the intellect may claim to know about the ultimate conflagration of the world or its freezing to death, the human will to live is irrepressible, right? There is, even though intellectually we might think that, bad things are coming our way, ultimately, right, the human will to live is irrepressible. And what does that mean practically, he says? This affirmation of man's will to live can never spell acceptance of life as it is or of conditions as they are. Why? Because he, as Kaplan always says, let's take a look at experience. Let's take a look at the way we experience life, and let's learn from it truths that can help us live, a rich life. So he says, let's take a look at it. Well, what is it that we're supposed to look at? He says, when people realize that they are not more the author of the drive to make the utmost of their lives, then they are the architect of their life itself, right? We are born into this life. We don't create this life. Man, it's 1955. We have to accept that it's going to be a lot of man in these quotes. Man cannot but view his life and its overwhelming impetus to conquer whatever stands in the way of expression and growth as emanating from a cosmic source. Now, what he's saying here is that people have this will to live, which is irrepressible. We have this desire to grow. We could get discouraged sometimes when we see, the negative things that are happening in our world. We could get discouraged sometimes when we see the negative things that are happening in our schools, or in our jobs. But he feels that there's a reason why we can avoid that when we realize that push to realize ourselves in a constructive way is not something that comes from within us. It kind of transcends us. It's something that is common to multiple people. It's common to humanity as a whole. And it's true of the natural world as a whole. It's true of nature, right? So outside my window now, all the trees are losing their leaves, but because I'm from Montreal, come April, they all pop back, right? This will to creativity and rejuvenation. He says it's programmed into the universe, right? And therefore he sees it as emanating from a cosmic source. It emanates from what he's willing to call God, right? So he's telling us that, yes, we should never give up on the situations that we face, whether they're difficult situations in work, difficult situations in classrooms, difficult political situations, difficult environmental concerns, because we'll look at something quickly about that. But we don't have to feel that we are being foolish in not giving up, because rather we are being compelled to not give up because there's something in our nature that makes us not want to give up. And that something is something that we share with every living thing in the world and is ultimately rooted in what he calls God, right? So we're going to be able to find the resources in some way to move forward. Now, I think as an aside, Kaplan would one of the things that would help him avoid gloom, I think, is the beautiful work that is being showcased in this innovation garden, if I can say that as an aside. Now, moving ahead, right, because that's from 1955. Here, thanks to Mel and to Jane Susswein, we have transcripts of things that Kaplan was telling students and counselors at Camp Sedgwick in 1972. And this is from work that the Kaplan Center is doing that we're going to be showcasing at a later date in some form. And here we have a whole transcript that Jane transcribed and that Mel recorded back in 1972, so going back a lot of years, in which Kaplan is talking to these counselors at Camp Sedgwick. And he's basically kind of revisiting, giving them the same message that he's giving himself in the diaries in 1955, right? So somebody asks, and it just says on the transcript that it's a boy, so it's a male voice that's asked it. Can you make any predictions on how long it is going to take the world to go before we have a United States of the world, right? Because Kaplan has been talking about the fact that we need to bolster the United Nations. Our whole ability to succeed as a people, as a world, is going to require us to live differently. So what does he tell them? He tells the group, when I'm asked about predictions, I know that there are two kinds of people who predict: pessimists and optimists, right? Pessimists who always see the worst, and optimists who see the best. I am neither. I am an ifist. I have a basis for that in the tradition. After the Shema, you say, if you will obey, then this will happen. The Im is the whole Torah. If the Jews will obey God's law, they will be happy. If they don't, now listen to these last three sentences. They're a recapping of what he told us in 1955. There's something in the world, and that's God, who compelled the Jews, who is compelling us, meaning not just the Jews, but the people and the people before him, but the world as a whole, that is compelling us to survive. You see, for example, God is compelling you to come and listen to Kaplan. What made you come here? Right? So he brings it down to their level. So I think it connects in a way. Anybody who, like the people on this call, have a vision of, wanting to, create new programs, imagine new programs. There's going to be a lot of obstacles along the way. Hopefully, the Cedarbaum Prize and the things that we're doing here kind of helps make that a little bit easier. But it's, creating things is not an easy task. And yet 39 people submitted these visions. Kaplan would say, well, even within the context of a world where it's not easy to create new programs, and sometimes it can be complex, they're costly from a human standpoint, from a financial standpoint. Even so, you guys have set out to do that. And why is that? Well, Kaplan says that's just part of our nature. Our nature is to try to move forward, to create things, and to move the world forward. But he's saying that we shouldn't look at that as just something that is in us, and it's, maybe it will exist, maybe it won't exist. But rather, for him, it's built into the very nature of what it means to be human. It's built into the very nature of our cosmos. And ultimately, that comes from God, right? So since it comes from God, it's reliable in some way. It's not going to vanish. It's not going to vanish for this particular reason. I only have 2 minutes left, according to the time that I'm getting from Jeffrey. And I just wanted to point out this other thing, which I put here, because, COP27 is happening. And in these same transcripts that Jane has put together for us, and based on the first conversations that Mel had with Kaplan in 1972, he talks about ecology. And that's clearly something on which we can be very depressed. The data is indicating that it's not going to be the 5-degree catastrophe that there was the fear of, but it's going to be 2 degrees or something like that. It's going to be a tough thing, and one can get discouraged. But Kaplan, again, doesn't think that there's room for discouragement. And in the context of this exchange, which I've kind of put together from 2 exchanges that Mel has with Rabbi Kaplan. So it's not all in one sitting. I've kind of fused together 2 of them. Kaplan talks about the importance of ecological education, and that it is equally as important as spiritual education and ethical education. And why? Because we need it to survive. Without the air, we can't survive. But notice what he says at the end. I think this part is what I wanted to share with you in the minute that I have, which is, he says he's very excited about Ralph Nader, right? This is 1972. So there's he's doing all his work on the emissions for cars and the safety of cars. And he says, so Mel, asks him, so it's a religious imperative, to do ecological education. And Kaplan says, absolutely. Why? What Ralph Nader is doing is most important. You have no idea to what extent religiously his work is important. I was so happy to learn about him. To me, he's contributing much more to human life, from a religious spirit, than certainly any of the religions. Even at best, the best simply talk about it, but they don't do anything. So Mel asked him, so would it make sense, therefore, to say it's also a religious imperative to support a person like Nader? Absolutely. And Jane put an exclamation mark, so we know that he probably banged the table when he was saying it. Not only that, when he emphasizes the indispensability of clean air and the danger of the other automobiles that poison the air, he does it in a more religious way than I do. So how can that be? Well, I took the answer from another part of the interview. Just Mel says, because what Ralph Nader is trying to do is trying to get people to observe the law. Exactly. You have to create laws. You can't do it otherwise through society. You can't persuade people through ethics. You need laws, right? So I hear there's a tremendous idealism. Keep in mind, Kaplan is 91, 92 years old here, right? And he is so animated. And there's an idealism in the vision that he's putting forth, but there's a tremendous realism. You're not going to get things done just by talking about how important it is. You're going to have laws that support it. The same way we cannot support ourselves just by our idealism. We need to have structures, and we need to have faith that somehow our idealism is not misguided, because Kaplan says there's something in the very nature of the universe that just supports this type of work. So I think there's a lot here to support the innovative spirit, and it's been a pleasure to share this with you.
Thank you so much, Eric. I think there's a lot for us to sink in, and we'll have to continue the conversation outside of this time and space. Certainly, Kaplan seems very timeless to me, very applicable. So I'm going to introduce our second Cedarbaum winner. We heard from Beck this morning, and I just put in the chat the conference list so we can be ready following Michelle to go. If you're going to a workshop, as Jeffrey did, you can put the name of your workshop after whatever your first choice was. Things worked out well, they evened out well. You can go to whatever your first choice was. If you didn't pick one, you can go ahead and look there, and Sheridan will be getting the breakout rooms ready during Michelle's talk. So anything else on that, Sheridan, or shall I go ahead and introduce?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm so excited and happy to introduce Rabbi Michelle Greenfield, our Cedarbaum Prize winner. She's the Rabbi and Torah School Director at Kol Tzedek Synagogue in Philadelphia. She's a 2020 graduate of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. Rabbi Michelle believes in Jewish education that honors each child, inviting them to bring their whole selves to our communities and classrooms. She has a background in special education and has worked with agencies and synagogues to create programs for children with disabilities and their families. In her 15 years of work in the Philadelphia Jewish community, she has worked for Jewish Learning Venture, Jewish Family and Children's Services, and many local synagogues. And as an educator myself, I am so excited to learn about her innovative Hebrew Tefillah curriculum.
Thank you so much, Karen. We're really, really grateful for this opportunity to share, and also the opportunity to have a different type of resource than we can often put into creating curriculum, as many of you know. So I want to start by sharing a little bit more about myself and my role and the context of our school, because I believe that all curriculum and all education happens in a context, right? We are primarily creating something that works for us in our context, and our hope is that as we share it, other people will figure out how that works for you in your contexts, but that all education isn't separate from where we are, from who we're with, from what our organization believes in. So while I'm sharing a little bit more about Kol Tzedek and about my context, I'm going to invite you in the chat to share, if you want, where you are, any organizational or synagogue affiliations, your position, or anything else you want to share with us about how you are showing up today. Because we're also all coming to this Zoom space with our own context, some from Arena Conference, some are here for the day. So I want to invite you, if you want to share in the chat, anything about where you're coming from and your context. So as Karen said, I work at Kol Tzedek Synagogue, which is in West Philly. We are a growing synagogue. We're affiliated with the Reconstructionist movement. This is my 7th year, so I have been running the school for a long enough time that I've seen many of our kids kind of like as they've grown up and moved through the years. Something that is important to know about us is that we don't have a building. We have a small office that we rent, and we don't have a building, which in some ways drives this project, as you'll hear. We have about 100 kids in grades K to 7. We are, as I said, growing, and our kids meet on Sunday afternoons with their grade level classes, but all of our Hebrew learning, all of our Hebrew reading and tefillah decoding learning happens on what we call a chavruta model. So kids work in groups of 2 or 3 kids with a teacher. And one thing that makes it different than what some other schools are doing is that families have the opportunity to opt into Hebrew as an additional activity anywhere we say between 1st grade and 5th grade. So we have some kids who hit B'nai Mitzvah and have had 2 years of Hebrew reading learning, and we have some kids who hit B'nai Mitzvah and have had 7. We make exceptions in every way, as we all do constantly, 7 years of Hebrew learning. So when we create curriculum, we're holding that families are making different choices, and that's something that we believe in and want them to have access to. So a few years ago, we began to create our own Hebrew learning materials, mostly for practical needs, because we don't have a building. If we have 40 kids learning Hebrew and nowhere to store supplies, books are very overwhelming, right? To bring 40 textbooks with us each week would be incredibly overwhelming. And as I'm sure many of you who are synagogue educators have experienced, when you send books home, they don't always come back, right? And dealing with the consequences of that was very overwhelming to us. So we started to create materials that we could use to teach Hebrew reading and prayer, that we could print a lesson at a time for students and for teachers, that we could send home a packet and a lesson and never worry about whether it was coming back. And that was really key to us. Karen, our school right now meets at a local public school that we rent. In my 6 years, we have met at a park, on Zoom, in a series of preschools, at this public school, and at a different private school that we've rented. So we are constantly adapting to space. So right now we have an amazing home in a local public school. So we started to create these things based on our need for something that was a different physical match. We found that we could create a different type of accessibility when we have our own materials. And we also found that in March 2020, when all of our materials were designed in-house and basically existing as Google Docs, we had a different power to adapt and change because we had our own materials and everything already existed online. So coming from that, we've decided that it is time for us to create tefillah curriculum. We want to make sure that we are continuing this for our children. And I know that there are some of you who are interested to see what we're creating and why we're creating it. So I wanted to start by inviting you to share what you see, like physically, when you open a book for teaching Hebrew or learning prayers, what are some things that you see in that book? And you can type it into the chat or unmute yourself. What is something that you see or expect in that book?
Letters and vowels.
Yep, letters and vowels.
Translation.
Yeah,
we often expect translation.
Dated illustrations.
Sorry, Jeff, why don't you start and then I can tell who else was speaking. So
Dated, unattractive illustrations, often.
Sometimes, yeah. So was it you who was also trying to speak?
Yeah, I was doing the opposite, hoping for inviting for the exciting for the children and for the teachers.
Yeah, and I think, right, the images, the trend, the illustrations that are in a book have been changing, thank goodness, as more and more things are published. But a lot of times the images are dated. And yes, Kevin, this does go back to the last piece of optimism or pessimism, right? We might all be looking at the same books even and imagining different ifs of what could be happening with these books and how our kids might be seeing these books. So when we look at images in a book, when we look at translations in a book, one of my questions in an ongoing way is, who are we representing? Who's in a family? Who's wearing a kippah in an illustration? Who do we see? People of what ages are we seeing? What visible disabilities are we seeing? What races are we seeing? Are we seeing that everybody is Ashkenazi? And what does that say to our children? We recently purchased a newly published book that I was excited about. And on the second page was an activity where there were 2 images, and one was a person with short hair and a red t-shirt, and the other was an image with a person with long hair and a red t-shirt. And the activity was to draw a line to match which is the moreh and which is the mora. And in my community, we pretty strongly believe that you cannot know somebody's gender based on a picture of them. So when we're creating Tefillah curriculum, we're imagining all of these pieces. So for us, knowing the words is important, but making sure that kids in this paradigm that we talk about with Mordechai Kaplan of belonging, behaving, and believing, right? Being able to recite the words is behaving, right? And there is value in that. There is value in being able to enter a space and being able to enter a Shabbat service and jump in. There is value in that piece, that specific. There are many other pieces of behaving, but there's value in that piece of behaving. But if our curriculum does not pay attention to kids' needs and to our desire for kids to have access to belonging and believing, we are missing something. And many curriculum are working with these ideas as well. It's not just us, but those are some of the things that are guiding us. I want to share an image. You'll give me 1 second to bring up this image that we use with our 7th graders as part of a different curriculum unit. But I want to invite you to interact with an identity wheel. And I apologize, I'm having trouble finding the right. Okay, great. So we invite our students to start their 7th grade year by thinking about the different identities that we have. None of us has only one identity, right? You might not have other religious identities other than Judaism, but none of us comes into a space with only one identity. This is not an exhaustive list. On this list, we have race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender identity, sexual orientation, first language, age, religious or spiritual affiliation, national origin, immigration status, physical, emotional, and developmental disability, family makeup. So I think some of us use these identities and express these identities in different ways. So think for a moment about your identities and which identities you bring into your classroom with you, which identities you bring into prayer with you. We might have moments where some of our identities aren't at the forefront of our minds, but others are, and that might change from moment to moment. So I'm wondering if anybody wants to share a way or a moment that your identity, any of these identities, comes with you or is a part of what you do when you're teaching. Go for it, Devorah.
I am diabetic and I wear an insulin pump, and my students know it because the first thing I do on my first day of class is show it to them, and it has a red light and it has a beep, which I often don't hear. And I tell them about that. I said, if you see it beep, if you hear it beeping or you see the red light, please tell me, because oftentimes I'm so used to it, I ignore it. And that's an identity that I bring to every class because I have emergency supplies for if I have low blood sugar or something like that. So that's an important one that I have 4th graders. it's not complicated, and they're pretty good about it.
Thanks. Does somebody else want to share about an identity that you bring into your teaching, or a way that one of your identities interacts with your teaching? And if it's not accessible or not easy to you for you to unmute, you can share in the chat as well, although I'm having trouble seeing the chat and screen sharing at the same time. So if somebody can help monitor that, that would be great. I want to ask you the same question. Is there an identity for you that comes in more as a learner when you're in learning spaces? Is there any of these identities that you feel is more at the forefront or is more at play in a regular learning space or in a learning space that you have been in recently?
I'm not a teacher, but I'm interested in your distinction between race and ethnicity and how you describe that to your kids.
Yeah, there are many, many versions of this chart, and this is actually not the one that we use with our kids. It's the one that is the clearest to share a screen with that I have found. So I think that ours does not have ethnicity separately, but I think that there are a lot of different ways that we engage with these questions with our kids, especially our kids for whom none of these is a simple answer, or they might have multiple races and ethnicities. When I use this chart with kids, it's an opportunity for them to use it how they want, and fill in what they want. Any ways that your identities interact with your time as a learner?
I would say I am definitely a hands-on learner, and I don't know if it really fits into this category, but I actually, the very first thing I say to my students is, you know, I'm not going to sit down and read every word in a book, but we're going to be active. And it kind of reaches to the kids that are not, you know, studious in a sense of just reading and reading. So the kids that need to be active are allowed to be active. So, you know, I make it clear that that's kind of how I have always been, and that's how I'm going to teach as well. And we'll read a story or do some prayers, but in between we'll play a game of some sort. So, I mean, I teach prayer by reading a line of the prayer, talking about it in Hebrew and English, and then pulling a block from Jenga or whatever game it would be. And I let the kids know that.
And I think that's a great way of making sure that we are allowing our kids to bring their identities in, including age, right? How many of us, I would suspect that most of us have been in some learning space, some teaching space where we are, for many reasons, suddenly aware of our age as we enter these spaces. Sometimes it might be that we are 30 years older than our students, sometimes we might be because we are the youngest person in the room, right? For many reasons, we might have moments where we're entering a learning space or a teaching space and we're more aware of our age than we are in other moments. We might have moments where we enter a room and we are suddenly more aware of our disabilities, or right, different of these identities come in to our minds and to our awareness as we enter different spaces. I want to ask one more, and
Michelle, to help you with the chat.
Thank you.
Beck Richmond. She said, identity as birthing and feeding person impacts presence in learning as it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't see any. I'm just keeping an eye on the chat for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Totally. Are there any moments that you can think of when any of these identities has affected the way you enter, or has been at the forefront of your mind when you are praying or when you are in a space of communal prayer?
I did.
Laura.
I went to Slichot services in England in 1971. I was a college senior, and I was dressed in a short dress And these people at the Marble Arts Synagogue were dressed to the nines. I mean, top hats, tails, long dresses. Oh my God. I just wanted services because I was going home the next day or two, and I wanted to do it where I was, and it was just so weird. Talk about socioeconomic, foreigner, all of that.
Yeah, and for us, our identities changed for a lot of reasons over time and throughout our lives. But sometimes our identity doesn't change, but our context changes, right? You were in England. When your context changed, your relationship to this prayer space changed in a different prayer space. So I want to share a story that when I was in kindergarten, a very early memory, that I was in an after school program. Kindergarten was half day, and the other half of the day I went to a program at the conservative synagogue where I had gone to preschool. And one day, one of my friends was drawing a tree, and she started to draw the tree with a green triangle. And then she drew another green triangle under that green triangle. And she drew another triangle under that green triangle. And one of the teachers came and stopped her. And they said to her, "You can't draw a Christmas tree here. This is a Jewish space." And her response was, "I'm drawing a pine tree," which is very reasonable, especially for a 5-year-old, right? She was drawing a pine tree. But I think about that now, knowing and understanding very differently now, of course, than I did when I was 5, that she was probably one of the only children in this program who had a non-Jewish parent. And that our teachers knew that she was holding this identity, and she might not have known the ways that they were reflecting it back and the political pieces of that, but that the way we interact with our students, for better or for worse, incorporates and plays off of all of their identities. If somebody had told me not to draw a Christmas tree, it would have been a very different experience for me than for me, who happens to have 2 Jewish parents, than for a child who does not, and who is, not allowed to bring that identity into their Jewish space. So I share that to invite us to remember that we always have students with multiple identities. They are human beings too. And the way we invite them or disinvite them to bring in identities is key. So our big project right now is creating a tefillah curriculum that doesn't ask any of our kids in this space, specifically of tefillah learning, to leave any of their identities at the door. Our goal is to create a tefillah curriculum that invites them to come in fully, to bring their whole belonging into this moment of learning about behaving and maybe learning about believing. So for us, that means that we're exposing kids to the non-binary Hebrew project. It means that we're teaching about names for God in a way that we know can't be totally separate from how we pray. We're not just doing a unit on names for God, we're integrating different concepts of God and gender into our curriculum. So I'm going to share a few statements that we're not using, but that for me illustrate the need for this. That could be from basically any book that is teaching tefillah. So imagine the sentence, imagine how your learners would interact with the sentence. We say the Amidah 3 times a day. Imagine a child in your school or a child that you know in a Jewish community reads the sentence to introduce the Amidah learning. We say the Amidah 3 times a day. Anybody want to share a reaction of how that would hit, I don't know, a 3rd grader?
Nope.
Caitlin?
Nope.
I'm not part of that we.
Yeah, I feel like there would be confusion because the practice wouldn't match what's being taught in the curricula, at least the practice that's being embodied in the prayer spaces that they're in. The Amidah is probably not being said 3 times a day. That's an ideal of practice that's being upheld as somehow being better, like embracing halacha as being embraced as like a pure form of Judaism, but yet we're not practicing it. We're somehow passing it on to our children as the model that we don't necessarily embrace ourselves. So it sends a complicated message.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also we don't all necessarily believe that the ideal way to practice Judaism is to say the Amidah 3 times a day, right? So it's not just, are we doing it? It is that our goal? And it's, right, sentences like that are all over curriculum and materials that we share. So here's another one. Every Jew around the world uses the words of the Shema to pray. When your grandparents learned tefillah generations ago, they also learned to recite the Shema.
Take the word every out.
Right, so not every Jew uses the word Shema to pray.
And the Shema really isn't the beginning point for most traditional Jewish learning. So there's an embedded fallacy in the statement as well.
And
yeah.
Also, some people's grandparents might not be Jewish.
Yeah. Right. We might have, we might have learners who have no Jewish grandparents. We might have learners who have a few Jewish grandparents, but it is possible that we have learners who have no Jewish grandparents. If they have parents who chose to be Jewish, they might have none. And right, how is this reading if this is how we introduce Shema learning? Right, or they might have secular Jewish grandparents who did not learn to recite the Shema also. I'm going to share one more, and then I will share a little bit more about what we're creating very briefly. We've made a lot of progress. Like how we do curriculum and how we talk about this we've made a lot of progress. And we, until very recently, have had the most progressive books and the most welcoming books say at the beginning of Modeh Ani, boys say Modeh Ani, girls say Moda Ani, and maybe some of us are also saying, and you can choose which one is right for you. Devorah.
I had I went to a service where there was a female cantor who said Modeh. And after services, I went and asked her, and she said, as a cantor, I'm leading the congregation. So I do the all-inclusive. And I thought that was a very good answer. We need gender neutral language in Hebrew, but we don't have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as part of the education, to understand how gendered Hebrew is and, why it's that way before you can even maybe make that statement, and then without just getting rid of that altogether, because we're still, right, we're still wanting to be authentic to our tefillot. I mean, would you say that is part of your, with modifications?
Yeah, I want to
program.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I want to hear Robin, and then I want to share a few pieces of what we're creating and also what other people are creating. Go for it, Robin.
I think that it negates the fact that some of our students are non-binary and that they have to choose if they're from one gender or the other, which makes a very uncomfortable environment.
Yeah.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah. Mel.
Could I speak?
Yes, please.
Yes, I just want to speak to the matter of the Modeh Ani. There are some people who criticized or mock Reconstructionists that we pray to whom it may concern because we reject the idea with Kaplan of a supernatural deity. But I think this Modeh Ani prayer illustrates the essence of prayer. Sleep, according to the ancient Babylonians, is the twin of death. In other words, when you sleep, you're completely unaware. It's as if you don't exist. And the night passes many hours, and we are unaware. And you fall asleep if you're lucky. And the next moment, it seems that you wake up, but it's actually many hours. And so it is as if we were dead and we are resurrected. The point I want to make is that the prayer is simply a matter of gratitude. And we don't have to say that we're grateful to anyone. We're grateful to the process of waking up, and we're grateful for the way in which our body works. And the prayer is an expression of our deepest feelings about being happy that now we have woken up. So I think the modality is a model of what prayer is according to Reconstructionists, and I'm glad it's been mentioned here.
Yeah, Mel, I totally agree. And I think the question that we're answering is who is the we and who is the I, and how do we give kids authentic language to learn, not just kids, but how do we give learners and ourselves authentic language to refer to ourselves? I'm going to share the website of the Non-Binary Hebrew Project. These are folks who are working on creating grammar and systems for non-binary Hebrew. So Modeh, right? Some people will say Modeh is the default and therefore inclusive. And some of us say, hold on, I'm not included in that default. And some of us are offering Modim or Odeh as other options without getting into like all of the details of grammar. Those are great. This is one more. Right? This is not to put down any other versions that are being used, but it is worth knowing about. This is something that is gaining awareness and gaining traction. There is a Siddur that has been published or is in the process of being published that uses this non-binary Hebrew grammar system, not just for referring to the human individuals, but also referring to the divine. And there is definitely a conversation to be had about change and how change happens in communities over time. For us, we're finding that when we teach tefillah, we want to offer this as an option to kids for how they refer to God. And also you'll see the versions here for applied use actually are not changing the language that is used to refer to the divine, but are changing the language used for the individual. And we're finding that this is where the belonging and believing and behaving can sometimes even be in conflict, that if our community is using certain language, we need to decide constantly, are we teaching the children to be literally on the same page? Are we teaching our students to do what they feel is the most authentic to themselves, and how do we balance that? I'm going to share our, we are working on creating a number of packets for different tefillot, and we started with Havdalah because our students do Havdalah every week as a community. So they have a different relationship. It is not words that they have never heard before. It is words that they hear every week. It is a very different tefillah learning experience than some of them have when they're learning other tefillot, if they are not Shabbat morning regulars. So we start by giving it to them in the way that we sing it. When we do Havdalah at Torah school, I tend to sing as the leader, Ruach HaOlam. There are other moments where we say Melech HaOlam. We start by giving it to them to read. We have many reading activities because we know that I think that having a page of words to read in the same order over and over builds memory in some ways, but actually reading the words is a different skill, and we're constantly balancing those different skills that we want kids to have. We have a small piece on meaning. We have less with Havdalah than we do with other pieces because the kids are so familiar with it. We have more reading activities, but then we have a piece on gendered language. We're built into our curriculum for our teachers who work with our students. And again, this is groups of 2 or 3 kids. So a group might skip all of the reading activities because kids are struggling. If they have kids who do not need to work on sounding out words anymore, I would love to see that happen. They might skip all or some of the reading activities. A group might skip a conversation about gendered language if the kids are not into it. But we want to make sure that our teachers and our students have access to all of these pieces. Our hope is that we're teaching in an honest way that challenges our kids. We want to hold on to the intellectual honesty and creativity. And we also want to invite them to bring their whole selves, which means that we are, in open-ended ways asking a question of, what is holy to you. We are starting with Reconstructionist liturgy. I know that there are many folks who are publishing things with Reconstructionist options, and we are, because we're creating for our community and then sharing, we are starting with Reconstructionist liturgy and building around Reconstructionist liturgy, which I think is different than what's happening still in many places, and we're excited to be doing that. We're hoping to and excited to share at some point as we keep creating. And I would love, you know, I'm happy to share more, but I also would love to hear your reactions if there are pieces that you are, if there are pieces of what you're teaching that line up with this, if there are pieces of this that are deeply challenging to you. I'd love to know, you know, as we begin to wrap up, what seems comfortable and what seems uncomfortable, and what you would ideally want to have.
Michelle, can you put your email and contact in the chat? Because I'm
Yes.
sure there'll be more questions and responses than we have time for right now. And I can see that people are engaged. So I
Yeah,
want
and
them
what I'll say is that we have, in terms of people are asking for materials, we have this draft of the Havdalah packet that we're happy to share. One of the reasons we're excited to have the Cedarbaum Prize is that it will let us pay somebody to make it look better than I can possibly do on a Google Doc. And we will share more once we have cleaned it up. I'm happy to share what we have, but also know that once we have cleaned it up, we have an intention of sharing in different ways so that you can all access it.
Great.
Devorah.
I was just going to say that I have a non-binary child in my 4th grade, and it's difficult for them, and it's hard for me. I, along with a lot of older people, have trouble looking at one person and calling them as opposed to he, her, whatever. So it's on my side, and it's also a problem for students in the class who don't quite understand. Because 4th grade, I had one teacher, another teacher in our school, who said, we don't need to deal with that. That's not an issue here. It is. This kid was in your class last year. So, you know, it's a problem for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think
it doesn't help.
I think Hebrew doesn't help. And Devorah, I think the fact that you're aware of it and talking about it and pushing the conversation is a huge piece. Like, this is something that takes practice. There are some really great songs about practicing pronouns that I cannot find quickly enough to share, but it is an ongoing conversation. And I also really want to challenge that 4th graders don't understand, as it sounds like you are, that 3rd graders or 4th graders don't understand or aren't ready, because they do. They are ready and are respecting their understanding wherever their understanding is the most important thing that we can offer for them. Yeah, right, exactly, Laura. Our kindergartners share pronouns at the beginning of the day. They are probably understanding it differently than our 7th graders are, but they are definitely understanding in deep ways.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I know, as an education director of a school myself, I am so eager to get a hold of your materials and when they are ready. And you know, I know that's down the road, but yeah, I think it's going to go into an amazing place. And I know I can speak from, there's many people here, but from those of us from RENA, I think we might be reaching out to you and as a fellow RENA member, and see how we can, you know, collaborate more and support your work and learn from each other.
Yeah,
so
I'd love to collaborate. And I know there are other people here also who can, like, I'm happy also, it's not an area of deep expertise, but I do, as do a bunch of other people here, have extensive experience with using different pronouns for folks in our classrooms and with conversation.
Right, that's like a whole nother workshop.
Like, yeah, we can't get into it now, but I think
right, yeah.
If you're finding yourself struggling with it, know that there are colleagues who have been working on this in different ways and are really happy to be resources. Well, I'm not gonna share who it is, but there are I know there are other people here who also can take that on.
thank you so much. We can do our Zoom clap or thank you, to to Michelle. I think you're staying on to go to a workshop. Michelle, you're gonna.
Unfortunately, my students are in.
Oh, you were with us earlier. I know you were with us
too.
earlier for one of them. I know it is coming to a
You'll
really
be with the real life
afternoon for
third and
many
fourth
of us.
graders.
So unless Jeffrey has anything to add, I think we can go right to the breakout rooms.